Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Genesis Women's Shelter Client Services webinar. My name is Amber Neely. I'm a counselor here at Genesis, and I'm joined with one of our other counselors, Charlotte Weatherford.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
So before we get started in our topic today, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items and reminders, okay? And so first, I just want to say that this presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not meant to be instead of counseling. It's definitely an education heavy webinar. And also, as we're giving information and we're talking about different strategies and techniques, please consider your own consideration and safety concerns before putting into practice any new ideas that we talk about today. Okay, so we want to talk about safety. And so again, please be sure that you're watching this in a safe place where only safe people can hear it. You might want to wear headphones to ensure that nobody else can hear what you're watching. After you've watched this webinar, you want to clear your browser history if you are concerned that anybody is monitoring your phone or computer. And if you are watching with us live on Zoom and you need to leave the webinar quickly, please remember you'll need to click end a couple of times and then close the Zoom page in order to fully get out of this. Again, with confidentiality, so please, if you're watching with us live on Zoom, please do not use the chat feature because if you do so, your name and comment will be seen by anybody who's watching the live video or the recording that will be on our YouTube channel. Again, if you are watching on our YouTube channel, we just ask, the comment should be disabled, but if for some reason it's not, we ask that you don't leave any comments on that YouTube page. Because again, that information will be seen by anybody else who watches the video. We want to share some of our crisis and support information with you. And so of course, we know that the people watching might be experiencing crisis or having thoughts of self-harm or things like that. And so if you're in a crisis while you're watching this webinar, again, please call our 24-hour hotline at 214-946-4357. That hotline is also going to be the hotline if you are seeking shelter because you're fleeing a domestic violence situation or if you're needing some assistance with safety planning. If you're interested in counseling with us at Genesis, please call our outreach office at 214-389-7700. And then if you have any questions about anything that we're talking about in this webinar, please contact us directly. We are going to leave our contact information at the end of this webinar, so you will have access to that. It's also at the end of every single one of our webinars on our YouTube channel. So please call us directly, me or Charlotte, or we have another counselor that helps us with these, Jordan. Either one of us can help you out if you're needing any assistance. Again, we don't monitor or respond to any comments left on the YouTube video recording, so you'll have to reach out to us directly. I wanted to share these hotlines again. Here's our Genesis hotline here. There's also the National Domestic Violence Hotline. That number is 1-800-799-7233. The hotline, the national hotline can connect you with resources throughout Texas. So if you're not here in Dallas and you're looking for some resources in your area, then that would be a great resource for you. And then also the National Suicide Hotline. So we know that experiencing domestic violence and trauma is really, really difficult. And sometimes that leads to some thoughts about suicide or self-harm. And if you're having thoughts like that, please know that there are people out here that want to help you and support you in that. And you can call the National Suicide Hotline at 800-273-8255. Okay, so we're going to jump into a new topic actually now. So if you have been following along with us, we have been talking about previously the Daniel Siegel's work, The Whole Brain Child. Now we're moving into a different series. So we're going to be talking about attachment regulation and competency and exploring some parenting strategies, and this will also refer to this as ARC. And so today we're gonna provide a lot of education for you guys on trauma and how trauma affects children. And so we know that that can be a lot of information. It can be hard to hear. So if you need to step away or take a break or pause, if you're watching on YouTube, you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And again, like I said before, you can always call us if you have any questions. So we're going to just jump right into this, and we're going to talk about what is trauma. And so I know that we've covered a lot of this in our workshops when we were talking about the whole brain child, but I also want to just go back over this definition with you guys. So trauma refers to experiences that are overwhelming and that might leave somebody to feel helpless or vulnerable or extremely frightened. Trauma may include specific events like being in an accident or experiencing a natural disaster like a hurricane or earthquake, and it also includes ongoing stressors such as family violence. And so children are also deeply affected by other ongoing stressors such as poverty, racism, repeated bullying, discrimination, particularly when related to the characteristics of the child's social identity. And so at Genesis, we specifically work with women and children who have been impacted by family violence. And when we're talking about family violence at Genesis, we're specifically talking about intimate partner violence or domestic violence. And so that's what we're going to be, these webinars are going to be focusing on. While we recognize that there are lots of other traumas, like I mentioned, that a child is experiencing, we are going to keep that in mind, but we're really going to focus on the impacts that domestic violence has on the family system and how this impacts a child. And so just to define domestic violence for you guys, domestic violence occurs in an intimate partner relationship when one person uses abusive tactics, verbal, emotional, physical, or sexual, to maintain power and control over that other person in the relationship. Okay, and so the goal of the perpetrator is power and control. That's the motivation. And for kids, when they're witnessing this type of violence, it's really traumatic for them. It's really scary for them. And I know sometimes, even if they don't see a physical assault or they don't see this verbal argument, they can feel the tension and the changes within their family system. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how this impacts children.
Hey everyone. So in our previous webinars, Jordan has done a really good job describing specific behaviors or symptoms that you might see in your kiddos based on their age. But this kind of gives a good overview of things that you can look for. Obviously, y'all know your children better than anybody. So if you start to notice these changes or you start to see some of these behaviors, then this is something you can kind of keep an eye on. So some children, in their response to a traumatic or really scary experience, they may start to develop an expectation that bad things will happen. So that can look like different behaviors or different symptoms, but overestimating times when they're in danger, they may seem overly nervous. If they're young, they may seem overly clingy or avoidant of things that they might fear that are going to be dangerous. Fearful or withdrawn, even in situations that feel safe to other people. So like I said, you know your kiddos. If all of a sudden you're noticing that they're a lot more nervous or avoidant or fearful of situations that they weren't before or otherwise that aren't scary, then that might be an indication that they've been impacted by something that scared them. Children may have difficulty developing a positive sense of themselves. So children who experience trauma may feel damaged, powerless, ashamed, unlovable. I think a lot of times children, they're really good at observing things, but they're not necessarily great at internalizing or understanding what's really happening. So they kind of jump to their own conclusions or make their own beliefs about things. And oftentimes those can be beliefs about themselves. So for example, they may hear an argument and their name is used in the argument, and then they're just going to assume that mom and dad are arguing about me and this is my fault that they're arguing. They don't understand that that may not be the case, and they're making it about themselves when it's not necessarily about themselves. It is often easier for children to blame themselves for bad things that are happening than to blame others. And over time, children may develop a belief that there's something wrong with them. Another piece to this is oftentimes when children are experiencing strong negative emotions and they don't really understand what that is. So that might be extreme anger, or that might be rage or fear, and they may not understand really what that feeling is. And especially with little kiddos, they have a tendency to feel that, well, I'm having this feeling of anger and this must be something about me. This must be something that's different about me that makes me bad. So sometimes, you know, you can give them the opportunities to talk to them about these things and see what kind of beliefs that they're starting to internalize, and think beliefs about themselves and beliefs about family and about conflict. Sometimes children will have a hard time forming relationships with other people. So this oftentimes with kids especially, something that's scary that happened to them might have happened perpetrated by somebody that they know, or they might have felt like they weren't protected by somebody that they know. So this might start to interfere with who can I trust, who is safe, who can I rely on to protect me and to make sure that my needs are met and that I'm safe. When early relationships aren't consistently safe, kind of like I was saying, they'll develop this sense of mistrust and not really sure of who they can rely on or feel safe with. They may have difficulty managing or regulating their feelings and behavior. So this is a big one. You'll see that kiddos will either try to over control or shut down their emotional experience. So a lot of times that might just like their head hanging down. They don't want to talk about it. This, like with older kiddos, can look like perfectionism, just trying to over control everything, minimize the emotional experience, avoid emotions, and just try to over control the environment so that they don't have to experience that. Managing feelings and arousal through behaviors such as being silly or getting in fights. I think a lot of times you might see that at school. If they are having a hard time sitting in their seat, they have all this nervous energy inside of them. So it may look like they're the kid that is wiggling in their seat or can't stop getting out of their seat, or maybe they're being silly with classmates, or maybe they're feeling a lot of pent up aggression and anger, and so that causes them to get into fights with other peers. And for older children, like teenagers, this may look like relying on more dangerous, overt methods to get that feeling of arousal and release that energy. So substance abuse, self-injury, this might look like speeding too fast in their car, things like that to sort of get that emotional release that they're looking for.
Okay, so let's talk about the body's alarm system. And so we have, excuse me, a built-in alarm system that signals when we might be in danger. This is also known as our amygdala, right? This is a part of our brain. Your amygdala's job is to literally scan for danger. So all day you have this alarm system in your brain that's scanning your environment to identify whether you're safe or you're in danger. And so evolution has helped humans to survive by creating efficient systems in our brains that recognize danger systems or signals and prepare us to respond. We become particularly efficient at recognizing signals that have been associated with past danger experiences. So this is where things can get kind of tricky, because sometimes those signals that are associated with past danger experiences are things like a smell of a cologne or a certain song, right? So there's certain sounds or certain smells or things that get associated with these dangerous experiences that will still trigger that alarm system in our brain that we're in danger, when maybe we're not in danger, but because of the trauma that we've experienced, our brain is recognizing that this signal is danger. So it's very efficient. And sometimes what happens with ongoing trauma is that it becomes a little bit too efficient. It's working too well. It's identifying everything as danger. Okay.
So like Amber was saying, when the brain is recognizing a cue for danger and is going to respond to this danger, we have several different defense mechanisms or responses that naturally every human being has. So the first one is going to be the fight response. So, and it kind of just depends on what you're able to do in that environment, what's going to make the most sense. And I also want to say that this reaction is immediate. It doesn't, you don't have to think about it. It's just like if you were driving down 35 and somebody cuts you off in traffic, you're going to have hit the brake and turned your wheel before you ever had to think that you needed to do that. So the same thing is with these responses. So if a large dog begins to attack your dog, you're bigger than that threat and you feel motivated to help your dog, your response might be to fight. You might try to fight that dog off and survive in that way, or help your dog survive in that way. You may be standing in the street and you hear the squeal of brakes and you realize that a car is speeding directly towards you. You're not going to think about it. Your response is just going to be to get out of the way, to run away. If you're a small child and you're in a room where your parents are maybe getting in a big argument and they're screaming, maybe something was thrown, especially with young kids, they're not going to, they know that they can't fight this threat. They can't fight their way out of this. They may know that they can't run away because they're not fast enough to run away, or maybe they just don't want to be noticed. And so their response is just going to be to freeze. If a young boy was maybe was threatened with harm if he didn't engage in some sort of activity with an older teenager, and was feared the consequences of not complying, then that only response that that child might feel that they have is to submit and comply. A lot of times the freeze and submit and comply responses, we don't hear as much about those, we don't understand them as much, but especially with young children, this might be the only defense response that they have, or that they feel the most comfortable using in that moment. This is basically when somebody feels that they cannot physically escape this. They don't have any choice but to submit, to comply, and to try to just wait until this threat has passed. To become very still and to try not to be seen, to yield to the aggressor. So these are just the kind of 4 ways that someone might respond to danger in a traumatic way. So again, so when the brain recognizes that there's this danger, and like I was saying, like you don't have to think about anything, your body just knows immediately to kind of shut down all aspects of your brain and body that aren't needed for survival, and just basically prepare your body for survival. So this is going to include releasing a number of chemicals that are going to provide your body with the energy needed to cope. For example, to run from the car or to fight that attacking dog. So that's why a lot of times, like I said, use that example of somebody cutting you off on 35. All of a sudden, you're going to notice that your heart started pounding, maybe your hands were sweaty, and that's just an indication of all that release of chemicals. Within milliseconds of perceiving the danger, the body's arousal system goes up, your sensory perception shifts, all non-essential functions like digestion, anything like that is going to shut down. Mainly it's like your body's responding and trying to send more blood to your larger muscles so that you're able to run, things like that to really prepare you. Higher cognitive processes such as logic, planning, impulse control are considered non-essential in the face of danger. So like I was saying, all of that higher level thinking is just going to shut down and you're just going to be in a survival response. It's also really important to remember that this response can happen whether this danger is real and a car really is speeding towards you, or maybe you just heard the screech of a tire and that was a cue that your brain recognized for danger and you still had this response even though a car wasn't actually speeding towards you. Kind of like Amber was saying, this is a really important and amazing response that we have to respond to danger, but when your brain has become oversensitive to these cues, A lot of times these responses might look like, you know, a boss maybe says something that's, that you thought was really rude, and then all of a sudden you're responding in a traumatic response, and that may look like yelling back. So there's times when this is really helpful, and then there's times when we really need to be aware of this process and to help kind of slow it down before we react without thinking.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. So I know we just shared a lot of information about the impact that trauma has on you and on children, and all these different functions of our brain that go on when we experience a traumatic event or a danger. And so we want to just spend the last couple minutes talking about some ways that you can help your children out when we know that they've been in a home where there's been domestic violence and they're having some of these responses and some of these symptoms. So one thing that's really important is to keep in mind that children are aware of the abuse and they feel scared. So a lot of times, when I was growing up, I remember hearing people always say, like, oh, kids don't know what's going on, or they're not going to remember, or they're going to be fine. And they actually do know what's going on. There is research that talks about, you know, when a baby is in utero, even being able to feel the stress of what's going on. They might not be able to recall a memory of what happened, but their body remembers. And so not discounting that. It doesn't mean now that your child is broken or that they can't heal from this. It's just important to know that they are aware of what's going on. And their perception can matter just as much as what actually happened. So just like Charlotte was talking about, when we've experienced these traumas and our amygdala is overreactive, that alarm system is overreactive, they may perceive threat where there maybe isn't a threat. So they might be responding to a command to go do their chores. They might be responding to that in a way as if there was, that was a threat or that was a dangerous situation for them. And children also make up their own perceptions about what happened regarding the abuse, right? And so oftentimes children are blaming themselves, or they're creating a story in their head and telling themselves something about how it was their fault that mom and dad separated, or it's their fault that dad is hurting mom. And so sometimes they are creating their own narrative about what happened. And just like it says here, they believe the abuse is their fault. This is very common. Children are very me-centered. It's not because they're selfish or bad. That's just how we develop, especially our littles. They're very centered on themselves, and so they are going to internalize that and believe that they have to have been doing something to cause these problems in their family. It's too hard for their little brains to recognize that they actually have nothing to do with what adults are doing, that they don't control adults. And so reassuring this child that, you know, it isn't their fault that any grown-ups are having problems or that grown-ups are making poor choices. It's just not their fault. Something that's really important to remember is that children may love and also fear the abusive person at the same time. If this is this child's father, their love for their father doesn't just turn off because he's been abusive. And so this is a very confusing feeling for a child to have, to hold love and fear for a person at the same time simultaneously. It can feel really mixed up and confusing. And so it can also be hard for mom if you've left this relationship and your child has seen how abusive this person has been, yet the child is still wanting to spend time with them. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, that this is something that is very common and very normal for a child to have this love and fear for the abusive person at the same time. You know, we talked a lot about how children respond to trauma, and so sometimes we see that they're acting out, their behavior is really overt, and you can really see that they're struggling. And other times we see that they're acting in, right? Maybe they're isolating, maybe they're having more somatic symptoms, maybe they have tummy aches more frequently or headaches. You know your child better than anyone, and so if you're noticing changes in your child, that's something important to pay attention to. And then also know that children might want to talk about what's happening, but they just don't know how. And so, you know, that's where we can come in with counseling for your kids, and you can also have these conversations with them as well. because even if your child is one that's more prone to being isolating or withdrawn or really quiet, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to talk about what's happening. And so, right, being age appropriate, you know, it is important to have conversations with your child about changes that are happening in the family. Again, going back to the first point, that they are aware of what's going on. And so, you know, as much as possible, like letting them know and talking to them about what's happening in the family, because they have a right to know too. Okay, and then Charlotte's going to finish us off and talk about some parenting tips and techniques.
Yeah, so we just want to give y'all some general tips and techniques to use with your kiddos. First of all, I think it's really important to establish expectations, limits, consequences when things are calm. So this might be like having a family meeting and just letting your children know exactly what you expect of them. What are the family rules? Like in this family, it's okay to be angry, but we don't hit each other or we don't call each other names. Setting those limits and then discussing consequences that the child will face if they do choose to engage in that behavior or to pass that limit, and they already know what's expected of them and what's going to happen if they choose to do so. So what are the consequences? I also think this can be really helpful in general, just as establishing family rules and consequences, but also with each individual experience. So let's say maybe you're going to a restaurant with a toddler. Sometimes I think we just kind of don't realize that children don't understand what's expected of them. They don't understand social norms. So just telling them as you're walking into the restaurant, okay, I expect that you can sit at the table and you can play your game and color your sheet until dinner comes, and then I expect you to eat dinner and stay in your seat until we leave. Just establishing that's what I'm expecting. This is the consequence if you choose to not do that. Routine and consistency are really important. Children really respond to routine and consistency. They like to know what to expect. It helps, especially like with bedtime. If they know that every single night they eat dinner and then they have a little bit of playtime and then it's bath and books, and that never really changes, then it makes for the nightly routine to be a little bit smoother. They know exactly what's coming. And consistency with that routine is going to be really important, as well as consistency in your responses. So if, you know, one day they hit a sibling and they don't get a consequence, and then the next day they hit a sibling and they do, that can be really confusing and they don't understand that lack of consistency. So I know that sometimes that can be hard with everything that's going on, but really just trying to maintain that can be helpful for your kiddos. Sensory play, this is something that is just an activity that they can get involved in that will keep them engaged a lot longer than a lot of times you'll expect. But it's also a calming activity, and it's something that can be used as a coping skill as well. So this might be like making slime, making a stress ball. You can just pour some flour or sand into a balloon and tie it up. You may want to put it in another balloon so that doesn't break and you get sand everywhere. But making a stress ball, so then that's something that they can squeeze maybe during a difficult assignment for homework, and that's something that they can sit there and squeeze. Water play and sand play are huge for kids. They love that kind of stuff. Even if you just get like a big bin, shoebox, something like that, and you can fill it with water with various toys, sand, even rice and beans, and you can just put measuring cups, spoons, whatever toys they like, and you'd be surprised how long they'll engage in those activities and how calming they can be. Just increasing family fun and trying to increase positive experiences amongst each other. Game night, movie night, maybe working on a project or a puzzle together as a family, family bike ride, bake, just trying to give your family opportunities to enjoy and engage with each other. Get moving. So this can be really helpful just in general with kiddos, like with all that built up energy, getting them to be able to release that. But this is also helpful if maybe you notice that your kiddo's been having a rough day, if they're feeling a little emotional, that will help them to get out of that emotional part of their brain and to help calm down a little bit. So just, you know, all of a sudden, if you're noticing that, okay, we need to change the scenery, you're having a rough day, let's go for a walk, let's go kick the soccer ball, let's play tag, We've mentioned Go Noodle videos in the past. Those are really great videos that kids are usually familiar with from school. They have a lot of great stuff on there that you could use if you needed some movement. Connect and redirect is a technique that we talked about in one of our, I think it was our first webinar. But this is going to be a technique that when you see your child is just really emotional, maybe they're just tired and sad and disappointed that they couldn't go to their friend's birthday party, something like that, then what's going to be important here is to help your child like calm down, soothe them, comfort them first. So whether that's distraction, soothing tone of voice, get down on their level, look in their eyes, scratching their back, just like a lot of comforting things for your child until you've seen that they're completely calm. And then once they're calm, then you can discuss whatever it is that's been going on. So maybe it's a solution to the problem that they were upset about, a compromise on something that y'all were disagreeing on, or maybe it's a consequence. But they're not going to be able to really understand that logic and that explanation until they're calm. And it's also going to be really helpful for your child's development and for their emotional regulation, for you to help them to start to understand and label their emotions. So whenever you notice that they're feeling something, just help them notice it looks like you're a little nervous, or it looks like you're disappointed. And then just help them to identify what coping skill usually helps them to feel better, whether that's distraction or sensory play or some deep breaths. But then they can start to learn that process of soothing themselves. So that's all we have today. You've made such a big step towards helping to support your child during such a difficult time for your family. And so we really appreciate you being here and joining us for this webinar. And this is our information. If you want to screenshot, you can contact any of us with any questions or concerns. And that's about all we have for today.
Yes, thank you guys so much for being here. Again, yeah, please reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns about any of the information that we shared today. Thank you so much for being here, and we hope you guys have a great day.